Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. It's a pleasure to see all these pictures now on the wall there in Harrogate, Johnny. I think, as Johnny was alluding to, I've shown original tintypes principally with Messams before. There's a photographer who, doesn't. Tintypes have been a significant and a huge part of my work over the last decade, but color has been part of my commercial practice and clearly is a form of photography that, as you're seeing, is something that I absolutely love too. And I wanted this exhibition to show images on a reasonably significant scale in terms of print and be able to share with more people that could potentially enjoy the same image as an edition of print. Really both bodies of work and the way that I work don't significantly differ in terms of the slowness and the time and the consideration with subject and form and texture and composition. I don't work fast. The tintype process, became such a joy to me because it was a slow and very deliberate process that was full of a practical thing as well as a visual thing. And really, I suppose, maybe that has fed back into my color work. So any of these color images that you see as well have taken me a long time. I think from a very early age, I was someone who it meant something quite significant to me about where an object was in space. So, I could sit down at my desk at school and it was an important thing to move a pencil a couple of millimeters on my desk. It had an emotional as well as important effect on how I see things. And that, I think, has stayed with me forever. So that when I'm composing both the images that end up as tintypes and the color work, small moves of an object, until they're in the right place for me, everything feels uncomfortable. And when they're in the right place, there is a reason to take the picture, to make the picture, and feel good about it. So it's relationships between objects, between things, and then clearly with the something that I've spoken about before with the tintypes, there is a serendipity of how the process throws in a curveball and makes something happen that I hadn't necessarily expected, that is in itself beautiful.
Sorry.
Go for it, Jane. Yeah.
No, what I find also very fascinating is that you worked as a commercial photographer before working with digital photography, and then you turn back to analog processes. And I find this back and forth very interesting in terms of the techniques you're using, and I wonder how turning back to analog photography influenced your color and digital practices later on. How does going back to this analog process influence your color practice?
That is an interesting question. And having started my journey in photography with the analog processes of first discovering the magic in somebody's darkroom, doing black and white work, and then continuing my career commercially using large format cameras and color transparencies and so on, and negative film. It was at the turn of the millennium, roughly, wasn't it? I think when the explosion of the digital world. And so it took me a while to transition to that as a practice. But I think something that happened on the way while working with digital was feeling that there was a sense that I wasn't there was a diminished soul that belonged to those things. I think I've rediscovered that, both obviously in the tintype, the magic and the soul of the process, as well as the finished product. But I think one can restore magic and soul through the digital process as well, by exploring how you evoke all the qualities that it can give you in the final print through gentle post-production enhancing and so on. You know, right from the word go, we were kind of looking for the feeling of film anyway. So I think that's where I am in terms of my color digital process. It is you make a record, and then you go back, and the darkroom has sort of transferred itself onto the computer, and you just coax the soul back into the detail, and the detail can be absolutely extraordinary, and gently pushing the color and so on. I'm not someone who has any real interest in the ability of post-production and photo retouching to change reality, to be all weird and retouch out things. That's not what I do. But so I think they fit together in that way.
And yeah, I find this element of retouching very interesting as well, because looking at this tintype, for instance, so there is no, just for everyone to understand, there is no post-production possible with this type of work. And you have a beautiful camera behind you. And I wonder if you could explain how an image like this comes to life.
Sure. So, as you rightly say, the tintype is, the actual tintype is exactly what I've started with, a sheet of metal, and I end up with the image, and that's it. So all the work of composition and creation takes place before I expose the sensitized sheet of metal to light. And then what you get is what you get. And I think that the evidences of my hand and of little kind of chemical glitches at the edges and the corners add an accidental beauty to the finished product, the finished image. So I've got here an actual tin, which this is a portrait. So it's this is what would have been made. This was made with the camera that's behind me, and so it's 10 inches by 8 inches. This one, I do have a bigger camera now that produces bigger tin finished images. The lens here is a very beautiful 19th century lens that was made really at the birth of photography in 1860. Photography, as we know it, was kind of came from the late 1840s, really. So there are qualities about these old lenses that add a certain nature to the finished image. the qualities that these pictures have are so detailed. This one that you've got on your screen right now, I think is an indication of something a bit special for me. I mean, I think that the pear obviously is quite the most spectacular shape of an object, and for the skin of this one has in its monochrome nature become like a bronze, really. Most of the images that I make use either soft natural light or me making an equivalent of soft natural light in my studio with artificial lights. This was made in direct sunlight, hence the very sharp shadow. And it was the only time that that pear sat on that surface and the sun shone. I thought I might make a second one, but clouds came along and that was it. There was never going to be another image like that. But on top of that, what happened on the edges, on the right and on the top, was not my design. That was an accident, and it's just the most stunning accident of, that's added to the composition. And so from all of that, I have this sort of rather perverse control that I try to put on everything in terms of where things are and how things should sit within the frame. And then I have to let go, and I love letting go now. I mean, that's the, like a paint spill on a painting. It becomes itself. It's the medium that actually adds something really important to the finished article.
Exactly. Yeah. And going back to your color photograph, they do have this amazing painterly quality to them. I think because also you experienced this analog process before, or using it simultaneously. And I think they kind of echo each other in a way, which I think very interesting.
I think often I'm trying to create the essence of that object, of kind of understanding in terms of form and color and texture, everything that there is about that thing. So yeah, and hopefully there's a sort of, I don't know, a spirituality about it, but it is, objects to me speak. And if we go back, man-made objects speak. The image that you have on your the second image, Julie, of the
this one,
of these are gin bottles. I can't quite remember from when they date, but this is disposable packaging of its era, and they have the rough thumbprint of very fast manufacture of a low cost item. But for some reason, on top of that, they've ended up with a personality. And sitting them on a bench together, they started to talk to each other. And for me now, they're a bunch of ladies and maybe their children, and they're having a conversation. And I think man-made objects can do things like that. And speak to us just as nature can. But certainly the work that you started with at the beginning, and I think that you've yet to show the one that comes at the end of this PDF. This grouping of objects is the most recent work that I've done, and obviously these are more objects together. They're a little kind of dance, really, of things that have a delight to me, really, and I thought that was something to celebrate in this strange year that we've all had, of putting things together that have color and a delight to them, really, for no good reason. You know, they just are lovely things. So they all came from 2 or 3 days of walking in my and my neighbor's fields and delving around in my barn and finding these objects and finding the relationships that put them together.
There is something also fascinating about the choice of object you make. And I think the comment you made about this one is really interesting and insightful. And I mean, I was wondering if the choice of object, for instance, those ones, the color ones, there is of course display of texture and forms and colors, but you also also have an interest in botany, right? From your academic background, and I'm quite curious about how do you choose your object and how does that happen?
Well, if you pop us back to the Romanesco, Julie, that one has more than botany to it, because for me, that's a story of mathematics. This object, I think, is super special, and I think people will know there's a theory, a mathematical equation made by a man called Mandelbrot, who it's a very beautiful equation whose depiction I can't quite tell you, but it's super simple. And if you head one way in the equation, you head to zero, and if you head the other way, you head to infinity. And when the supercomputer starts to churn out these figures that this equation has, it depicts things like that Romanesco of objects that continue through magnification to become exactly the same, almost exactly the same as themselves, forever and ever and ever. And so over and above its natural beauty, I think these things kind of, well, they speak to me hugely, of, you know, the beauty in nature, but also very profound things. So I felt, yeah, that in color was something to delight in, and I have made a picture of that quite early on in as a tintype, because it spoke to me of how the nature of the tintype is that the image is recorded on molecules, individual molecules of silver nitrate, unlike anything that became more convenient and after this process that I use, where you have clumps of molecules that become like a dot, like a pixel. Tintype records things right down at the molecular level, so kind of infinite. And yeah, so that was part of the story with that beautiful object.
Yeah, I find the use of color images fascinating, and the digital images you're using, because when you think about digital image today, you think about accumulation, you think about images being taken very quickly, but here there is something very contemplative and very calming, I think, that emerged from those images. And yeah, I would be quite keen to hear more about this one as well, because
I think
yeah.
your through there is important, because I think I'm loving hearing what you're saying in terms of the contemplation and so on. And yes, I think we do appreciate and enjoy taking a little bit longer to see the things and revel in all their qualities, rather than rushing by. And so the dead leaf that preceded this picture and the things on show in that image are all that in the main they've ceased to live, but they still have an extraordinary beauty. I think, you know, one of the things that I notice in a lot of modern landscape and gardening interest is no longer cutting down dead plants, but enjoying through the season how they look, not just when they're bursting into life as they are doing in spring now, but how they look in the winter when they've, you know, when they're no longer alive. I think that's what I love to do, and if other people like to look at it too, I think that's great. But all these things, to me, have a strong beauty, and sometimes they have a sort of wit about them. I think, I don't know what it was, but that leaf on the left of the picture, when I put it there, it just sort of looked casual and confident, leaning there. And, you know, it's those funny things that happen just as much as wanting to see these glorious things, really.
Yeah, and engaging with still life is such a strong theme in the history of painting as well. And when you think about painting with those type of objects, you think about memento mori images, or this notion of nostalgia quite a lot as well. And I wonder if this is something that that you want to achieve with your photographs.
It's not something I kind of think of, I suppose, Julie, intentionally, but I think through absorbing, as we do over time, you know, all the things that interest us, both in other pictures that we see in galleries and the like, as well as objects that we chance upon, you know, as I've done here. You know, they have, I think they have that just, there are significances that come through, aren't there, of things both in death and in life. And I think actually, I'm guessing lots of us have found time in this last year to be a bit more thoughtful of a number of these things. We've had a bit more time on our hands, and it's been anyway, it's played on my mind. Some of these things, though, Julie, you know, I don't know how other artists work. It's an innate thing of how you put these things together, and it doesn't necessarily have, I can't necessarily explain a huge kind of raison d'etre.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they're open to interpretations as well, which make them even more beautiful.
That's lovely. I had a comment from someone relative to that first image that we saw of the rock and the spring and the acorns, and he said, "You're mixing up your seasons here, I see, Tif." And it took me a moment to understand what he was talking about, but of course, what he was talking about was the word spring and the fact that I'd picked these leaves at the end of summer or in the autumn. So, you know, that was his interpretation, and I'd never thought of that. So it's great. I think any artist is inviting someone to look at these pictures, their pictures, and make their own interpretations and to have their own feelings. I'm not putting anything out there.
I've got a question for you. I think, because I always think of you as like the coolest, slickest, Bermondsey-based kind of photographer, and so I'm wondering how are you finding rusticate? How are you finding the rural life?
Very, very pleasant, Johnny. Well, I don't know. I think to me, the city has obviously been a little bit tricky over the last year, and this was an intention to live in the country that we enacted. We began the process several years ago and thought we would be taking a lot longer than we have to get here. So living in the country now, I have all the same facilities as my city life. In terms of making work, I don't have galleries to go to, but sadly, until a few months from now, or a few weeks from now. None of us do, or restaurants. But no, I think big skies, landscape, and
do you have a dark room?
I do have it in the process of being built. Yeah. So, and it's a thing that I'm looking forward to doing is hopefully having seminars and the like, and inviting people to come and spend time and learn or practice the processes that I do in a lovely place.
That's
so
exciting.
See if people would like to do that in the future. Yeah.
I mean, I look at this body of work and it looks to me like nature's gently edging in. And crucially, countryside light, that sort of blue light of the landscape, the greeny tinged light, is just edging in these color pieces from the left-hand side. So for me, there's a subliminal messaging in your work. One is the objects which you compose and the thought processes, which I think, really are so well considered. I mean, they need time to unpack, and that's the quality of your art. But there's a little sense of something. The reason I say it is because there's a little sense of a room stage left, light stage left. It's like your eye is on what you see in front of you, but your mind's on that light source just on the left-hand side of you. Is that a physical location in your studio, or is that sort of composed?
It is some big agricultural barn doors wide open to the north light. Yeah, very fortunate. Sort of faced mildly towards Wales.
Incredible. I can pass back to Julie because I know another question's come in.
Yeah, thank you. We have a question about, I think it's about the first image that we saw together. It's a question about the table used to put the object on it. So the question is it an old metal topped butcher block, and does it have a history to you? And a second question is about the color background in your colors photos. What is this background?
Okay. Well, in the tabletop, actually, it's a bit like a butcher's block. It's a lovely thing on wheels, and I have two of them with entirely different tops that have an interesting word written on the base, which is experimental in pencil. And what I was told by the person that sold them to me was that they came from the Raleigh bicycle factory. So my understanding is that they were prototype kind of tables where new bits of bike were being assembled. That's the story behind them, behind that surface. So it's nice. It's a kind of very, very solid object that I can wheel about relative to the light within the space. Oh, and the background. Well, the background was just a piece of cardboard on all those group photographs. Just a piece of rough cardboard.
Thank you. I have actually another question for you, which is about because when I saw this 19th century photographic processes being used today, I thought, oh, it's so interesting because the effects that you managed to achieve with this technique are sometimes a little bit similar or are emulated by Instagram filters. And I'm quite interested about today, this turn back in time in terms of like vintage processes, vintage effects. And I wonder, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think there's, lots of people want to imitate, but I think also, I've definitely wanted to embrace a craft, a making, rather than a taking, really. So, this transition that happened in my world, and now we have to digital, and now we have, everybody in the Western world has a camera, don't they, with the phone, and a capacity to take a picture at any point. which didn't used to happen. And then I don't know. I think with multiples of anything, there is almost always a kind of pendulum swing to the opposite end, and I think the opposite end in this process is the uniqueness of the image, that there isn't another one, that it's, as we've been speaking about, it takes a long time to create. There are obviously contained in them often kind of nostalgia elements that you've alluded to as well. I mean, I think, you know, we don't see in black and white, and the first body of work that we probably ever came across was from photography, wasn't it? Painters didn't paint in black and white, so it belongs to a certain era, and so images that look like that have a borrowed nostalgia, I think. So some of the people that I make portraits of, you know, I've had people gasp as the image appears out of the fixer, and they've seen their grandfather or the grandmother in the print, in the tintype. So I think it's not something that I'm particularly trying to do, this nostalgic thing. It's more about the qualities that I think just are innately beautiful about the process and about the images that the process enables me to make. But I appreciate that. I think a lot of people looking at them find that other quality of nostalgia, or a touch of, very appealing. Yeah.
Yeah, and what you're saying about the difference between making a picture and taking a picture is really, really interesting, I think, to consider with this exhibition in particular. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, to me, the original obviously has an incredible quality that has come through, you know, a lot of craft. But I think that you know, it was very early on when I went to exhibitions and saw, for instance, Irving Penn's platinum prints, that the print itself was important. You know, it was a made object, and it has qualities. And as Patrick was alluding to, you know, there are color versions of prints that are extremely special. The paper I use is a Japanese washi paper, and the prints, I think, are very beautiful as an object. And so, you know, there wouldn't want to be lots of them, but there are more than one of them, which is, I think, very nice. And I think the scale of them, I think that's the other the final thing that really I should say about these, both with the tin and also with the color images. I just think that sometimes seeing what we know of as of a particular scale and depicting it in a much different scale gives the viewer something different to contemplate.
How big is your bigger camera?
The bigger camera is, I'll show you something, Patrick. Well, that's 1714.
Wow, amazing.
Which is a tricky thing to. They're tricky to do.
I bet.
I'm honing my technique.
So we start with the tin types, the original tin types, which probably are the hardest for me to show you because they've got the chop. And then what I did was to create the exhibition with the focus of these pictures. There's actually a fifth one, which is in the window downstairs, but they're almost like the Four Seasons, Tif. I know they're not, but color-wise they worked. And you see the verticals, just where you're sort of angled. You've got a 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock angle through here on this picture. Mm-hmm. So I mirrored it with, at this end, the same thing going the other way with this fantastic spanner. So the kind of the set of four kind of work as a group all together, which is kind of what I was thinking a bit. And then the greens sit in the middle. I mean, I just think these images are phenomenal, guys. This is the light I was talking about. Like that incredible sense of kind of like, you know, a presence. It's a suggested presence in the other room. It's phenomenal. Absolutely beautiful. Beautiful prints. And these are these walnut frames which we've had made for you. I'm a little bit obsessed by them, so I think they're really, really beautiful.
Oh, pennies.
And then these are the direct prints, which are interesting in their own right, because these are obviously, as Tif is saying, digital prints from the original tins. And this is, I think, as you say, elements of Morandi. Who could not think otherwise as you go through? And just the stillness of composition and thinking about pencils being put here, put there, it makes complete sense. Beautifully still. So these are that sort of scale. Life, no, these are bigger, aren't they, Tif?
They're bigger than, oh yes, bigger than life.
Yeah, just, yeah. And then this is the wall, which I think I'm just really happy with. This is Brian Taylor's work, by the way. You've got the sculptures. But that as a set just looks so, so good. So you've got the big single objects to the left, and there to the right, that fantastic ostrich egg. And then the feathers, I thought, were matching up against the celeriac. And then the group of three in the middle. All right, there you go, guys. That's a pretty, I don't know if that's a low-tech, high-tech version. There you go.
Cool. We just received one more question, and I wonder if we have time to address it. I think it could be good, but it's about the tin type process again. And I wonder if we could just summarize it again, if that's okay with you, Tif, for people who don't necessarily know or are familiar with it.
Yeah.
So how does it work? Step by step.
So how I make a tin type is the composition and the lighting and what I'm going to photograph has to be fully considered before I start any of the practical sensitizing of my metal, because once I get into that process, everything is has a time for which it's sensitive, and it's not very long. So when I'm ready, I go into the dark room and I pour onto a sheet of metal a chemical called collodion, which dries into a sort of skin, and then that goes in the dark into a tank of silver nitrate, and that skin of collodion is absorbing silver nitrate in a liquid form for 3 minutes. Then it's ready to take out and is dripping wet and goes into a dark slide in the dark room. And then I can bring that dark slide out to the camera and the scene and make the picture. In terms, if other people or the person who asked that question understands, we consider the sensitivity of film and digital and all the rest of it in a numerical scale called ISO. So a really high quality film, let's say, is 100 ISO, and your iPhone camera can take nighttime pictures in 1000, 2000, 5000 ISO. I've gone absolutely the other way. This technique, on a good day, my ISO is 0.5. And what that means is that I need absolutely vast quantities of light to make an exposure. So either that is a long exposure, bringing lots and lots of light in, or a short exposure with crazy, vast, bright light. So generally speaking, it's a long exposure. And we're talking, so for a portrait, that might be 20 seconds, or a still life where I've tried to stop down the aperture a bit, it might be anything up to a minute or more. Then I take that dark slide that's exposed now back into the darkroom, pour a developer onto it, and within 15 to 20 seconds, the development has happened. I stop that development in water, and then the image is no longer light sensitive and is stable, but it isn't finished. And then it gets put into a fixer and transforms from a sort of ghostly, bluey, creamy thing into the finished article in a very magical way. It's a lovely thing to share with when I do portrait sessions in my have open studios often, and people can see that final part of the process, and they can see the very beginning as I pour the collodion, but it's that process that you get oohs and ahs and gasps, and I am never not kind of beguiled by the magic of how that bit happens. And then that really is the finished image. It does need drying, and then to commit it to sort of perpetuity, one coats it with a varnish. The varnish I use is the same as people who created this process back in the 1850s. It's a very beautiful, I'm just trying to think of it. It's
shellac? What, shellac?
It's not shellac, no. I use, oh God, the name has suddenly gone from me. But it's the resin from a tree. And we know that resin as amber. Oh. It's a very beautiful permanent sealing of the image. And so tintypes, original tintypes, and I have lots from the 1850s, unchanged. It is the most archival form of photography. You can scratch it, but it won't fade in the light. It's there forever.
Thank you so much. It's really, really interesting to have a full step-by-step.
The whole process does take the physical process will take 10 to 15 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you, Julie, very much for
my pleasure.
Conversation with Tif, and Tif, thank you for explaining so elegantly and eloquently the processes and thoughts behind your work.